So welcome to this SharePoint and OneDrive presentation by Select Technology. My name's Jig Meta. I am the marketing executive here at Select. You've probably seen many of my posts on LinkedIn without knowing it. Your presenter today will be Nick Ellis, our digital transformation consultant. I will hand you over to Nick now.
So it's a little piece of camera to start. So today we're talking about OneDrive and SharePoint, what to use and when. So firstly, let's talk about what those technologies are. So OneDrive and SharePoint are, to a very real extent, the same thing. They're both fundamentally SharePoint. SharePoint is a technology that has been around for getting on 20 years. Used to be an on-premise only, now it exists principally in the cloud. You see a few companies that have got it on-premise, but it's principally a cloud technology now. We at Select Technology kind of actively promote using SharePoint rather than old-fashioned, if you will, file and print technology that used to be very popular, and again we still see it around, and we're still working with customers to move from file and print to SharePoint. At its core, it's all the same thing. OneDrive is just a particular configuration of a SharePoint site. Every business that signs up for any kind of Office 365, and the most basic entry-level Office 365, you get a SharePoint for every user, and you get a OneDrive for every user. And you get a terabyte of storage per user. Now that terabyte is not a terabyte of storage and a terabyte of OneDrive storage. It's a terabyte per user for everything, and you can cut it around in different ways, so you don't have to limit each user to their terabyte. It's just so if you've got 20 people in the business, you've got 20 terabytes of storage that the business can use however it likes. The fundamental question, OneDrive, SharePoint, what to use and when, can be boiled down to the very simple answer. If you're sharing it with somebody, use SharePoint. If it's just for you, use OneDrive. That's a slightly simplified version of the truth, though. There are times when you might want to use SharePoint for files that only you are working on, and conversely, it's not that difficult actually to share files out from OneDrive. There is also the synchronization with Windows. So by default, everything that goes in your OneDrive is synchronized to your OneDrive folder in Windows Explorer, which you will see. It comes up as it says OneDrive for Business, and then the name of the company. That gets downloaded and stored for your immediate use out of the OneDrive folder in Windows Explorer. You can do that with SharePoint. There are reasons why you might not, though. But interestingly, it's the OneDrive tool that will do that for you in SharePoint. So there's a few slight terminology peculiarities, but essentially SharePoint, that's for where you're collaborating with people, public files, and where you're sharing with others. OneDrive is for your own files. What I'm going to do through the rest of this hour, because I've answered the question in the first 7 minutes, you'll have noticed, what I'm going to do for the rest of the hour is talk about some of the functional differences between the two tools. Again, as I say, they are very, very similar tools, but there are some functional differences, and you should probably know what they are to get the best out of it. Before I do that, let's talk about mobile. So there's a mobile app for OneDrive, there's a mobile app for SharePoint. If you want to interact across both, although they're the same product, you do need both tools. Both of them have some functionality that's specific to mobile usage. So the OneDrive one, for example, you can configure that to automatically upload every picture that you take with your device camera. It's a good way of making sure you've got a backup of everything. Be careful, because it will upload everything that you take with your device camera. So, you know, if you've got a separate work device, then I would suggest it's probably a good idea, because you're presumably only taking work-related photos, unless you want your photos of Christmas and what have you uploaded onto work SharePoint. Maybe don't do it if your OneDrive is on a personal device. Ditto, the SharePoint mobile app will connect you to things like news stories, lists, and what have you that are SharePoint functionality beyond the file storage. We did a webinar, I want to say 2 days ago, but I'm sort of slightly losing track, Jig. We did a webinar about the additional functionalities in SharePoint, and we'll be doing that again. But all those sort of lists and all that stuff, that's also in the SharePoint mobile app. So again, what to use and when. Certainly, if you want to use any of that lists, news, all that stuff, use SharePoint, because it doesn't exist in OneDrive. OneDrive is purely about file storage and analysis and what have you, where SharePoint has those additional features. So hopefully I've clarified all of that, or possibly I've confused it. But OneDrive for your own files, SharePoint for stuff you're collaborating on, except on the occasions when it isn't that. So what we're going to do is go through some of those occasions when it isn't that. And we're going to be using a scenario. I'm just going to switch my screen now to show you what I'm looking at. This is OneDrive. No, forgive me. This is OneDrive. So what we're looking at here, I'm going to use the example of the same set of files in both, which is some music files taken from my own collection. I have an eclectic range of tastes. So we've got Pink Floyd, Madonna, and Johnny Cash, all of which I've listened to in the last week. There it is in OneDrive. Here it is in SharePoint. The reason I'm using these files is because they're relatively uncontroversial, and we're not going to reveal anything particularly troublesome, but you will get the idea about all the concepts and how they can be applied to other file types. Now you'll see here this kind of folder structure that we're all fairly familiar with, where you can drill down. There's no files in that one because it's still uploading them, to be fair. I'll go back to the Pink Floyd section, might have a bit more luck in there. But you're all very familiar with this this kind of structure of files which are in folders. Folders are in parent folders and what have you. It's a metaphor, if you will, for the old filing cabinets that we all used to have, and some of us still do have in our offices, with the hanging files. That's where this metaphor came from. That's why it looks like that. It's okay, but it's only as functional for sorting your information as a hanging file in a folder ever was. You sort of have to know where it is to navigate to it. Now, of course, we have search in both of them. So in OneDrive, search everything. That was a Delicate Sound of Thunder I was just looking at. Slightly pretentious name, but there you go. And we can search across all the files from here. That's going to search everything through there. Now, in SharePoint, we can search across multiple libraries, because we can actually have multiple document libraries in the same SharePoint site, where OneDrive is only ever going to show us the one document library because it is the keyword one. So you can have multiple document libraries in here, and that search functionality at the top is going to give you search across all of those. So for example, I'll just demonstrate that. So if I home, I can new, and I can add a document library. And it's going to ask me, okay, so what's that document called? Hit create. And I've now got two. One called documents and one called second document library. Exactly the same in terms of functionality. Why would you want to do that? So this is why, and I'm going to use this to encourage you to think about how we search and how we identify files. So at the moment, this is structured in the same way, this folder metaphor. As I say, it's okay, it kind of works, it's not brilliant. What we can do here in SharePoint is we can add what they call metadata. So we can start to say, well, tell me a bit more about this. If I go to quick edit, not that quick edit, evidently. I love when software does this.
We're just having one of those days, really, aren't we?
To be fair, I think it might be because this upload is still running, so that might be sucking up some time. Good. What this is going to produce when it loads is an Excel type layout that will allow me to add values to all of those fields. So I can specify an artist, an album, and a year on all of these files. When I've done that, I can take these files out of the folder. There we go, like that. So the artist is Johnny Cash, the album is at San Quentin, and it's country music. And from memory, I think it's 1965, but I'm honestly not sure. Now I can take all of those values there, and as with Excel, I can just run them down. You'll see here there's a little job processing that was finishing that off, and then when I go exit quick edit, so I can start to store information that, as well as storing the file, I can store information about the file. And one of the things that means is that I don't really need to keep it in this folder because I've captured that information now here, which means I can move it up into the parent folder. So think about that. So there's those files now you can see in the parent folder. Now, if I take any one of these albums, that one hasn't got many tracks, and again do the same thing. And let's probably say that rock music, which album is this? Medal, so that's 1971. Whoops, excuse me.
While you're working on that, what
Yes.
I'll ask you is a metadata same as a tag?
Yeah, so that's what this is. Metadata is this, basically. So I used that term metadata in a fairly throwaway way there, apologies. So what I mean by that, metadata is literally data about anything. So you, for example, on a photograph, you get metadata on a photograph, which is the date. If you've got GPS on your camera, it'll have the date, it'll have the location, it'll have the type of file that it is, the device that it was taken with, maybe a username that was signed on if it's on a mobile phone, etc. That is not the picture, but that is all the data about the picture.
It's the same with files having its properties. When you right click, look for properties, find the metadata there. And web pages will have meta tags as well. That will be descriptions, additional information about the page. And you'll have the same websites have the same with images as well. You can assign extra metadata. So I'm guessing it's all the same there.
So what I'm doing here is basically building that out So obviously the file will come with a certain amount more. No, it's not going to let me do that. These files will come with a certain amount of metadata of their own, and because they're MP3 files, it's not going to give me a lot, but there you go. There's a certain amount. What I'm doing here is building out a slightly more structured view where I'm adding my own metadata into the files. Why would I want to do that? So I'm just going to move back here. And I'm not going to do this for every album because we'll be here for a long time. But if I now come back to here, you'll see I can put all of these files in one folder, and I can then start to filter here. But just give me the country, and obviously that's going to bring back just the Johnny Cash. I can say, give me the stuff from 1971, and that's going to bring me just to the employment, and so on. And obviously, as you build this out, if you're using this kind of structure rather than folders, which you can do in SharePoint, you can suddenly start to access and interact with your files in a more kind of interesting way. You can say, okay, well, I want everything by date created or by person who created it, and so on. And there are all these different ways that you can structure your text. You can add descriptions of files if you want to, etc. Person, so you can assign a file to a person. You can do all of this stuff. This is where you've got data that you want to, or file data that you want to store a lot of information around. And this music is not a bad example. Obviously, with things like Word and Excel and PowerPoint, the search engine in SharePoint and in OneDrive is clever enough to dig through for you. So if you've got Word documents in a SharePoint file and you hit that search, you can search for a phrase that you know is in a Word document, and it will find it within that document, as long as the document's been there for long enough for the indexing job to have found it. So if you upload a brand new file, you're probably talking an hour at the most, and then it's going to be able to find that with the content inside the file. With things like pictures, videos,
these would be really helpful.
Audio files, being able to structure and add additional data around it that the search engine is not in and of itself going to be able to find. But actually, I would say even with Word documents, if you think of things like your quotes, your sales documentation, maybe your contracts and legal documentation, this sort of stuff enables you to structure it, and then you can get a bit more clever because you can start to give people permissions based on these values as well. So you can say somebody can come here, can see into the documents folder, but they can only see certain values, or they can only see certain columns, give people different views and what have you.
Can I ask, Nick?
You can ask anything you like.
So you've got, and I'm going to take it to a difficult one with your music file. So you've got your file, you've got your album. Could you call it multiple file names? So could it be different within two different albums? So can you have multiple?
Yes, you could.
So it could be under album 1, 2, 3. I could have it in a compilation. I could have it on the original version. I could have it in another rock album scenario.
Yeah, you could. You could. So if I were to go to, let's use artists as a better example. So the album is free text in this example, so you can do anything you like with it. Now this is a choice field, and there is an allow multiple selections rather, option. So I could, in fact, it wouldn't make any sense in this scenario, but if I, whoops, sorry, wrong button. If I take this one round to quick edit, I can in fact say it is both Madonna and Pink Floyd.
Awesome.
If I so wished. As I say, it doesn't really make any sense in this particular scenario, but
I'm thinking where I've got photos, say selection of photos, I might have a photo that's used for social media in marketing sense, but is also used for emails, is also used for events, and therefore I might tag it as this photo is used for multiple things, or the genre of that photo fits different elements.
yes. Exactly, yeah. So genres is always one that
it works quite well. Well, the scenario I'm thinking of, weirdly, is an episode of The Big Bang Theory where Sheldon has RFID'd all his clothes and tagged them so that his socks for a day of the week, tagged it also for the weather conditions, the seasonality, the year, the size, and all of those things, so that he could easily find it. Weird scenario, but same premise, just in a physical format.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what tagging is all about. To allow you to do exactly that, and then it makes searching, finding, managing your files, your data much easier. When we do go on.
I'm just going to pull in Nick's question about so the tag, the search was within the document for the tag info.
So it's within the document for the tag info.
I think what he's asking there
Not entirely sure I understand the question there, Nick.
I think what he's asking is it looking for that tag information within the document? No, the tag information is assigned to the document.
Yeah. So when it's searching within the document, if you think of a Word file, obviously by definition that's going to have words in it. It's like a silly thing to say about a Word file, but a Word file is going to have lots of words in it, and it's searching the text of the file, the tagging and the metadata. It'll do it all in the same search. Yeah. So I mean, if your question is, if I search up there for, I mean, I can now do search for anything that's pop, and it will have a think about it, and hasn't quite. There you go. It has actually found the folder, but I've moved all the files out. So
similar.
And so you have to allow the engine a little bit of time to actually find the indexes. But I mean, I think if the question is, if I search here for text or file name or tag, will it work? Then the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's a bit like in Google search or your Outlook search. It will look in the title. It will look in so on Outlook, it will look for what your subject line is, as well as the email, plus the content within the email. The search will just do it all.
Yeah.
Same as when you go Google, it will search those bits of information that you can't see, plus the text on the page, on a web page, to find you what you need.
Yeah.
And then you select it.
And then, so you can see here, I can start to do filtering so there I pick 2 genres. I can lose pop and add country and get different mix. So these columns of additional data, which you can call metadata, you can call them tags, you can just call them columns of data if you like. And then with the numbers, you can do sorting. To put, there's all sorts of different uses for that. So if you've got if you've got file data where that is going to be useful, then you need to put it in SharePoint, because if I take you to OneDrive, you will notice there is no option to add additional fields in OneDrive. You can't do it, right? OneDrive is built for, here's a store of my data, I've chucked it in there. Ta-da, done, right? That's what it will do. Now, that's slightly unfair because both of them, you'll see, have access to Power Automate. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to pick a file and then automate. So I can actually request sign off of a file from within OneDrive that will send the file out and we'll send a link. So when you request sign off from somebody, so say you're working on a file, you go, oh, I need my manager to approve this before I send it to my customer. You can use this function. It's going to request permission to be allowed to do it. When I press it, it will send it to your manager. It will give your manager access to the file, even though it's in your OneDrive. Whereas in SharePoint, obviously there's an assumption that they've already got. Now you'll notice as well, Power Automate, you can create flows. So you can actually build out your own automation from either of these. Sorry, create a flow. For some reason that is not loading, just because it likes to do that when I'm on a webinar. These things always work fine when I'm not on a webinar.
Because it knows you're on a webinar, that's why.
Yeah, I honestly think it may well be. So while that's loading, so automation, why you might automate. I'll just have a quick look at the things that you can do. They are slightly different between OneDrive and SharePoint. So OneDrive, here's the thing. So when a file is deleted, created, modified, and so on, this is a fairly similar set, but not quite exactly the same. SharePoint file. And there are slight differences because there is an assumption that other people can modify. But you can see actually from SharePoint, because I put the word file, it's going to give me the OneDrive ones as well. Microsoft wants my feedback. So there are slightly different things that in each that can trigger an event. And there are also slightly different things that you can then do with the files if you wanted to automate from them. So you've got OneDrive for Business and OneDrive. Now, where I mention this is that you can get into some clever automation if you wanted to around get my manager to prepare a file in OneDrive, get my manager to approve it using the automation, and then when they approve it, automatically publish it into SharePoint. Obviously, that would be the other way around here. You'd start with the OneDrive, get the approval, then do the SharePoint, move the file into SharePoint. But all of this is available. You do things like get file thumbnail and file metadata that we were just talking about. So there's a lot of automation that you can do in both. They are very subtly different, and I would encourage you to have a look at those. Sharing is a key thing that we need to do. Let's share this folder.jpg. Let's have a quick look at the file first. There you go, there's Johnny Cash in all his glory. At San Quentin prison, bravely singing a song which is very unflattering about San Quentin itself. But so to go share, select the file. Anyone with the link can edit. That's the default setting. So what you're going to do, select the file, go to share, or if you haven't selected the file, just hover over it and click that. You get to the same place. I can now add I can send it to anybody. I know that I'm putting a select technology address here, but that actually is outside of the business because you might be able to tell we're actually in a dummy Microsoft demo tenant there. So that's just demonstrating you can send that out of the business if you want. And I can send that out. It will send an email. Duke will receive an email very shortly saying here's the link back to that. Now, what Duke won't be able to do with that link is see anything else in this folder. That's completely governed by permissions. He's got a link to that file and that file only. And I wonder, Jig, if when you get that email, if you could just check that for me.
I will do as soon as that email comes through, and I'll confirm when it happens.
Marvelous. Now on the shared list, I can now go to shared by you, and I can see a list of everything that I have ever shared. Nick Ellis modified 8 hours ago. That's interesting. The reason it does that is because the local the browser is in my time, which is 15:33. SharePoint and OneDrive are in San Francisco time, which is 8 hours. So it confuses it a bit. So in San Francisco time, it's 8 hours ago. That is addressable with some config in your tenant. But so you can see a list here of everything that you've shared out. So this file here I've shared by link. I can go into that and I can cancel that link if I want to. I can set specific expiration date on it and so on. So I can say that the Jig's got permission to change that file until Friday and then no further. Conversely, in this tab here, you've got the shared with you. This only exists in OneDrive. So anything that is shared with you from anywhere, SharePoint or OneDrive, by other people is going to appear in this folder. And again, you're going to see when was it shared, who shared it, and any activity in terms of changes and what have you. So that's quite a useful thing. The recent files section is showing up my notebook, but not the music files. So that's because it's very difficult to change those music files, but the notebooks are obviously editable. So anything that you change and edit, as you change the files, you can you will see them in the recent files section. Now, creating files. Up here we have a new, we have upload, we have sync, and we've talked a little bit about automation. So you can use automation to push files in here if you so wish, but you can create them straight from here. So any of your kind of standard Office files, you can just go and create a Word document. Dun, 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 dun. The whole music. This is going to open in the web environment for Word, and I can say webinar notes. Build out that like any other ordinary file. Now, having done that, come back to here. There's my webinar notes. Now, I don't know how quickly it will have indexed that. It's not a very complicated file, not yet. It will do eventually, where it will actually index that word, that phrase that's in the file, and will allow me to search. So that's one way of creating new files in OneDrive. The other way, or another way, is to upload either whole files or whole folders, rather, files or whole folders. So if you go folder, it's going to give you a little pop-up and say, okay, which folder do I want? And the answer is going to be here, and maybe it's whatever, etc. I can go into here and say, let's have some anathema. Why not? And as I said, eclectic music taste. So that's going to upload that as a whole file. Alternatively, obviously, I can upload. Sorry, I always get my file and folder the wrong way. Alternatively, it's going to upload the whole folder. Conversely, I might go to bit of Bajork, play dead, and again I can upload a single file. When you do that, you get this little dialog here. It tells you uploading. Slightly misleading, it says uploading one item, which that's the Bjork one, which is waiting there, and it's ignoring the 55 items that are in front of it. So it's always worth, when it's here, click in, it will tell you exactly what it's doing, which files are uploading, at what point, and so on. And it will tell you, so there's 115, 16, 17, 18, etc. megabytes of 300 megabytes that have been uploaded. So that's the ways to manually interact with it, and then sync. So sync is precisely what it sounds like. It will synchronize it for you. I'm sure you're all using this, whether knowingly or not. I am sure you're all using it. So here you can see I've got my PC, Windows, C, all that stuff, and then I've got this OneDrive Personal and OneDrive for Business. Now, I can't linger too much on the OneDrive for Business because it is the business one. The functionality is exactly the same. So if I had a file here, I could just drop it into here from anywhere. So I can interact fully here with any of the files, move them around, and it's just going to sync that straight back up. So if I move that into the music folder there, and that's going to synchronize with OneDrive straight away, and so on. So that's what the sync does. That means those files are available to you in Windows Explorer. You can interact with them the same as if they were in your S drive, your P drive, whatever that you're historically familiar with. Now, you've got the same button here in SharePoint, and I'd like to offer a prize for anybody who can tell me why I don't want you to press that button in SharePoint. But in simple terms, the reason I don't want you to click that link is all this stuff goes away. It won't sync any of that. It'll sync the files. That's it. You won't get any of this stuff because the Windows directory just doesn't know how to handle that. And B, version history. The version history is only going to show one version here, but you can go to version history and see the history of that file. Now, that's really useful with Word or anything, particularly in SharePoint, where, and I've done this a lot, can somebody tell me where the template is for such and such a file? Oh yes, here it is, it's in SharePoint. Good, I've opened it up into Word and I've started writing not the template, but the file that I was trying to produce. And then what I've done is I've overwritten the template with the file that I was working on. And then the next person comes in, they're not looking at the template, they're looking at the report I've written for my customer. Really annoying. Now, I've got two choices then. I can go through and delete all the stuff, or I could just do a file save as, give that another name, then come to here and say, right, okay, that one there, then go to version history, because when I did that, it will have created a new version here. I can take this one and say, okay, version 2. The version change, by the way, on this one is where I added that metadata, the date, and so on. Here is the version change where I added the name of the artist. So if we look here, fully populated metadata, I can now go version history, take you back to number 2 and just say, okay, restore that one. That's the one I want to use as the current version. It's now done that. There's a version 4, and if I refresh this page, wherever it is, lost it. Oh, to buy, Madonna. I'm very much hoping that that one is going to have removed it. It hasn't done it. Why is that? It was this track here, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. We've got 4 versions.
Oh, as Nick was saying, with his template one, it will roll it back to when it was a template.
Yes, exactly.
Because I've done the exact same thing before, and rolling it back is really helpful.
I'm not quite sure why it's done that. But yeah, so it's much more useful with Word documents. I'll show you here. So this webinar notes. Let's change that. Friday. You can see here it says saving, saved. And I've got version history here. So there's the just now. That's the original creation of the file. That's where I saved it to, say, Thursday, and then I've just changed it to Friday. Now, in OneDrive, you'll see it's slightly different because I've got the open file, delete version, restore, where it looked a bit different. So now I'm going to change that. I've got a version 4. Let's give that a second just to process that through. Should now say Thursday. Yes! You can get into, it's a bit like Wikipedia, you can get into kind of Wikipedia wars where you go, no, you know, and somebody else can come back and go, no, I want the I want the one that said Friday. You can do that all day if you like. You know, some people are like that. You can't. It's difficult to prevent that. But the goal, as I say, if you've got a central file and you want to maintain that central file, but you accidentally overwrite it, you can roll it back. Another one that's commonly used, particularly like in contracts and proposals, you go, oh, yeah, no, we took all that out. Can we put it back in? Much easier. Just roll the version back. Don't spend ages retyping stuff that was already there. So Teams is the other bit that I wanted to talk about. Now in Teams you can mount your SharePoint directories as tabs in a Teams window. So this is a directory called webinar site. If I take that URL, copy and go to any of my Teams, and I go to the files section, let's dismiss that. If I then go to add cloud storage in SharePoint, and I can use a SharePoint link, paste, go, which document library do I want? It's going to ask me for, because there's 2 document libraries in there. If you remember, you can have multiple different document libraries. I can add that folder in. So that is now the folder that we were looking at, presented through Teams. And then why do I want to do that? Well, I can then open that file in Teams, and there you go, there's the cover to Like a Prayer. Pretty good album, much underrated. But then I can start having a chat about that. Whatever the file might be, obviously it's going to be more useful if it's a Word file or what have you. But I start having a chat and a conversation, interacting with that file from there. Again, I can also...
And of course, it's not duplicating the files. It's just a singular version of the file looked at from 2 different places, which is actually really helpful when we're working with when we've been creating these webinars, because we can have all the work in SharePoint, say in a marketing folder or wherever, or in multiple folders, but we can access it via Teams, via our team, or via our channel, and not be jumping from one application to another.
And so on, all that kind of Teams functionality. But as you was just saying, having created that file here in Teams and worked on it, close that there, come back to the team. But if I now go to here, all being well, it says it hasn't.
It's the one occasion where it won't work.
There you go, there it is, demo file. So that's now available in SharePoint. And as you were saying, it's the same file, accessing it from different ways. You can't do that with OneDrive. Simple as that, can't be done. There is no OneDrive integration. If you try it, it won't let you. You can sort of figure around it a little bit by adding OneDrive as a website, but you don't get all the chat functionality. The chat is to the whole of your OneDrive directory, and in any event, it is your OneDrive directory, so nobody else will be able to see the content in it anyway. So what's the point? So if you're planning to discuss a set of files in Teams, they've got to be in SharePoint. You can't get at them if they're in OneDrive, except, because there's always an except with Microsoft, when you go to the posts section, if you're adding a new file, you can pull it from there. So if it's in your OneDrive and you want it to go into
that's an upload, isn't it?
You can, but then you're uploading a copy, and you need to be very careful about that. Now, everything that Jig just said about it not being a duplicate, this is a duplicate, because it's going to take it from your OneDrive, it's going to put it in SharePoint to enable you to work with it. That, I think, at the highest level, I've been talking for 50 minutes at fairly full pell, I think that's pretty much it.
Sounds awesome to me.
Just make sure that I haven't missed anything. Oh, the one thing I did miss, actually, because I started to say, why would you want multiple document libraries? Talked about the columns, the metadata type stuff. Those columns are not replicated in the other document library. So that's why you'd want different libraries sometimes. If you've got in the same site, here's one and I want this set of data stored about it, and here's another document, another set of documents, and I want different columns, that's where you put it in a different document library. That was the only other thing that I needed to say on that one. There you go, I'm done. I think I'll put myself back on the screen and see if we've got any questions.
Yeah, well, we've got Jeremy asks, why did the folder still show private after Nick shared the link?
Because I didn't share the folder, I shared the file.
There we go.
So the folder remains private. Everything that's in that folder is private, apart from that one file, which is what I sent Jig the link to. So Jig's experience of that will be that he can click on the link and it will show him that file, but it won't show the rest of the folder.
That is exactly
still private. The file is not.
Yeah, so I can't see
it. You can confirm that if you click on that link, you get the picture, but you can navigate up, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm confirming. I can only see the file. Nothing really about the folder. There's nothing there for me to access.
Yeah. So actually, there's a good point. Let me just switch this back on about sharing entire folders. You can do that. It's simply that's not what I did. The folder would still sort of, so anyone with the link can edit, or people within the business or specific people. So if you do it to specific people, it will still show as private because it's private to those people. But if we go with this one, actually that's not the way to do it, because we're going to send it outside the pretend business. Link sent. I'm not entirely sure what that's going to do. I think, yeah, so that's now showing the folder as shared. So that's the answer to your question. Yeah, I assumed it was going to do that. I'm glad it did. Yeah, so the answer to your question, why did the folder still say it was private? Because it wasn't the folder that I'd shared.
Cool, and I think we answered Jeremy's other question. Can you have a file that populates in many other team sites in SharePoint, like a link that you make one file and changes are updated to the file in different folders? Yes.
Yeah, so
that's what you've got, one file but different links to it, so it's different ways of accessing the same file.
So we sort of answered it a little bit. So there's different ways of doing that. One is to add the whole, as we talked about here, to add the whole storage area as additional storage into, we add cloud storage, and we added the whole SharePoint site in. Another one, let's say I just wanted to share this file I can go copy link. Now, copy, thank you. If I wanted to share that into this one here, then I can.
You just paste it in.
Yeah, pretty much. I'll paste that in there, it'll give you a link, but that link is then back to the original file. You're going to have slight permissions challenges there with any of these, so you've always got to make sure that the people who need to access it have got permissions to it. If you're creating SharePoint A, Teams Group B, and they haven't got the same set of people in them, you may find that people in the teams go, oh well, I can't get into that folder, and it's not the end of the world. You need to give them permission to do so. But yeah, you can sometimes end up with that situation. But it's very easy to share links around. That's the way to do it. It's also the other big advantage is you don't have to send attachments in emails anymore.
Yes.
I have a few missions in life. I'm going to confess, my missions in life. Beyond trying to bring joy to the world and eat best candy, is to stop people sending attachments by email because they don't need to, and also stop people sending emails at all if I can, because Teams will enable it very, very effectively. So, yeah, any more?
And can you give permissions to a file in SharePoint to a group? Oh, can you give permissions to a group of people to a file in a file? So if you've got a file, can you give a group of people, not just individuals? I guess you could do staff, couldn't you, depending on the email.
Yeah, so share
to staff, or
yeah, so if you've got we're in a dummy tenant, so slightly difficult. I don't know what the groups are, but if you set up a group, actually one thing I do know, let me go back to that team. What's that team? But another team site it's called. So I should be able to share to, there you go, members of another team site. So if there's an Office 365 group that exists, then you can share it to that, yes. You can also you can have multiple people when you share it as well. But yeah, so if you've got this is a good way to do it, because when you as we all should, and very few people do properly, but when you go in later and say, I finished with this team, I can bin this team now, that will have the effect of binning that share permission. So that's quite a good, that's a good way to do it, is through the Office 365 groups. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not great at, we're not always great at binning.
No, I know what it is. Don't beat yourself up if you've got loads of junk teams sitting in your team environment.
We're exactly the same. So.
and I mean, we're exactly the same. I can tell you for a fact because
we spoke to the other day and they said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be fair, I'm even trying to make sure I share links the way that Nick's saying as well. That earlier this week, share link, not file, or as an attachment. Send it all through SharePoint, because you're sending an email, you can send it directly from SharePoint.
Yes, you can actually email the file straight out of SharePoint, which is sort of what I did there.
And add your message to it as well. And
having shared it, as I say, you can always come back into this manage access and remove it or share it and what have you from there as well. And I've just noticed Deb's comment about Dean, our SharePoint engineer. I'll pass on your kind words, Deb. Any more for any more?
No, I can't see any more.
Look at that, 15:57.
We did an hour.
Webinar that is.
We did an hour on a SharePoint and OneDrive. Well, I think it's worked quite well, to be fair. Oh. So yeah, is there anything more you'd like to add, Nick, at all?
No, I think that's about it. I think we are we're doing another one around automation very soon, which is also going to be SharePoint based. That's specifically looking at how to automate approvals for invoices, but it's a sort of scenario to show basically automation of process using SharePoint and how it's very easy to do. I should warn you, it's also very easy to make a terrible mess of. So by all means, go and have a look around and what have you. But we are running a webinar on that. We're also running a webinar on Power Apps, which is the next layer up, where you start taking all of this information and presenting it as a mobile app of your own design. If that's of interest to you, again, I'm sure Jig will tell you the address to find them and register for those. But no, thank you very much for your time, everybody. I've enjoyed this one. Thanks for the questions. It's always good to get a few good questions, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yep. If you need to contact us, our details are on the screen at the moment, and I've put them in the Q&A section as well. So drop us a line. Any questions? We're always around. We are working. We are around. So I just want to say thank you for joining us.
One thing has just occurred to me.
Yes.
The feedback email. So we'll be putting out a feedback email very soon. If you wouldn't mind, we'd be very grateful for any feedback and advice and comment that you may have.
Yeah, that'll be with you in about an hour's time. Oh, yeah, and also, you know, come on to LinkedIn, follow us on there, follow Select. We post up all the webinars up onto there when we're about to go live, etc. So join us, like us, share us, comment. We're always happy to have a chat in some way, aren't we?